Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron. I am Jeremy Nettles, the evangelist for the River Ridge Church of Christ in Newburgh, Indiana. Today we are in John chapter 21. At long last, the final chapter of John's Gospel. Let's do a bit of a recap here. Chapter 20 was about Jesus' resurrection and the first couple of appearances that Jesus made, first of all to Mary and then to his disciples. He appeared to them twice in the course of chapter 20. And the function of chapter 21 is that of an epilogue. We talked last time about how chapter 19 was the climax, and chapter 20 actually gives all of the following action and the resolution of the story, and it all closes out, but then John's not quite ready to be done writing. And so he wants to continue on and give an epilogue and put a nice finish on this work that he has clearly labored so hard to complete. So let's begin with the first 3 verses of John chapter 21. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Okay, what's going on here? We're told that Jesus is going to appear to 7 of his disciples, but we haven't gotten into the actual story yet. Where exactly is this? It says the Sea of Tiberias. That's another name for the Sea of Galilee. So they're back up in the region of Galilee where Jesus had done most of his ministry in the first place. Remember, of course, he had been crucified and buried and he rose in Jerusalem. And so they've been down in Judea for most of the story lately, but now they've left that area and they've gone back up to Galilee, which was where Jesus grew up, where most of the disciples grew up and lived their lives, and it's also where they had done most of their teaching and preaching leading up to that final ascent to Jerusalem to be, executed. Now, we've established the where. What about the who? 7 disciples. 5 of them are named, or at least clearly identified. We've got Simon, we've got Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, meaning James and John, and 2 others. Okay, now Nathanael, whom we take to be Bartholomew, because Nathanael is a Hebrew name and Bartholomew is a Hebrew surname-ish thing, meaning something like the son of Ptolemy. Ptolemy being a Greek name popular at that time for reasons. We talked about this guy briefly all the way back in chapter 1, and that's the only other place in the Bible where he is named. Thomas has some recent history, just a few verses prior at the end of chapter 20. Remember, we called him Doubting Thomas, even though that's slightly unfair to him. The sons of Zebedee, those are James and John, of course. John is the author. So this is another actual personal testimony to what John himself saw with his own eyes. Peter, always Peter, decides he's going fishing. What is the significance of that? Is this just out of pure idleness? Is he just kind of bored and has nothing else to do? Is he thinking of forsaking everything that Jesus has planned and going back to his old life? Remember, Simon is a fisherman. So is his brother Andrew, and so are James and John. In fact, before Jesus called them to be his followers, those 2 crews worked together at least some of the time, based on what we can piece together from the other 3 accounts. It's not clear whether Andrew is one of the 2 others listed here in chapter 21, nor is it clear whether Thomas and Nathanael are fishermen by trade as well. I left the question from a minute ago unanswered, hoping to give you some time to think about it. I still can't answer it fully, but while boredom may have been involved, let's also note that Peter has a family to support, and it's likely the others do as well. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 9:5 that the other apostles generally were married, and while, of course, there are a couple decades between now and then, it's unlikely that Peter was the only one with a wife and kids to support. That need for financial support likely plays into this decision. That brings us to the next important detail at the end of verse 3. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. When were they out? At night. Now you can fish any time, but depending on what you're trying to catch and what the weather is like, often fishing when there's little to no sound from shore, and more importantly, no sun casting obvious shadows or relegating the lurking monsters to the murky areas, the ability to use a torch that now really stands out to attract unsuspecting fish, it all adds up to make night fishing a pretty attractive prospect for someone who's doing it professionally. This was not just an idle pastime, it was a deliberate and serious attempt to come back with a large haul. They were willing to sacrifice sleep for it, suggesting they had something more important to gain. They're probably not thinking about storing up food for winter, especially since it's mid-spring at this time, so it's pretty evident that they're in it for economic reasons. Now, does that mean they're trying to go back to normal after 3 years of tramping all about the countryside and inciting rebellion against Jewish and Roman authorities alike? Not necessarily. But they're at least looking in that direction pretty intently. Jesus is going to appear to the 7 of them, and there's some symbolism in that number, considering that they're not even all named. So it's not just about relaying the facts. John points out that there are 7 because he thinks that matters. The suggestion is that the whole group is thinking along these lines, because 7 in sort of Hebrew biblical numerology and symbolism tends to refer to completion, owing to the 7 days of creation making a full week. So it's not that all of the disciples are here together in the same place and looking to forsake Christ, but it's showing that a large contingent of them are doing it in the same way and suggesting that the others are thinking in similar terms. The other accounts and Acts and 1 Corinthians all tell us that Jesus spent some significant time with his disciples during this period, but it's not like it was before. He comes and goes, and he appears and disappears, and although they meet him in Galilee as he directed, and that's where they are in the scene, of course, they mostly spend this time hanging out in Jerusalem, centered on that upper room where they had shared the Passover feast before Jesus was crucified. So, this is one among many meetings between Jesus and his disciples, or at least some of them, before his ascension back into heaven. From what we read in verse 14 later in this account, it's one of the earliest of those appearances. John calls it the 3rd time. Let's keep reading with verse 4. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. I love the symbolism here, and let's keep in mind, it's not just that John is making up a story and chooses this beautiful imagery as a part of his fiction. He's relating what he actually experienced, which means Jesus deliberately appeared to them just as day was breaking. They've just been through a long, difficult night of fishing without any success. It was hard work, it was tough for them to see, and it seemed pointless the whole way through. Now the day dawns and the Lord appears and provides them with a great success. It's a metaphor for what's been happening spiritually in them. They were in the dark. They were working to no good purpose or effect, and there was nothing they could realistically change or improve. When Jesus appears, having risen from the dead, all of that changes. The light comes and illuminates everything and makes clear the path before them and gives them not only direction, but success. Okay, back to the facts. Why did they not know who it was? When I was a kid, I always thought this was odd. Haven't they, seen him before? Even since his resurrection? As an adult with a little more boating experience, it's pretty obvious that the distance involved, 100 yards, we learn in verse 8, is more than enough to make it difficult to recognize someone back on shore who wasn't with them in the first place and they didn't expect to see there. This could have been anyone as far as they're concerned, and the calm lake waters would allow the sound of his voice to travel. And let's be honest, Jesus had a fair amount of experience speaking audibly to large crowds dispersed over large distances. Anyhow, you can see the result, yet another miracle from Jesus and a nice demonstration that his power has not diminished. It's actually a repeat of a miracle he'd performed before, way back at the beginning of his ministry, before Peter and the others were even following him full time. You can read about that in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11, but the kicker there is verse 8. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." That's going to be sort of repeated this time, but in more meaningful and impactful manner, although nebulous. Let's read verses 7 and 8. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. John figures it out first, and impetuous Peter decides there's something more important at hand, leaves the other 6 to deal with this hard work, preferring to swim, fully clothed mind you, which makes it quite a bit more difficult, swim to shore immediately to see Jesus. We're not told the details of that meeting. It's left to our imagination, while John and the others are left to deal with the fish. Verse 9. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Jesus has breakfast all ready for them, and Peter does go back to help once they're all ashore, at least. Verse 12 again suggests something is different about his appearance, as if it's not completely normal feeling to them. Perhaps he doesn't look quite like they remember him, but they do know who he is for sure now. Okay, let's get into the really fun part. Verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." There is so much happening here, it's tough to catch it all, but it's typical John, more mind-blowing and the more deeply you consider it. First of all, verse 15, does Jesus mean, "Do you love me more than these other disciples love me?" Or does he mean, "Do you love me more than you love the fish and your livelihood arising from them?" If it's the first, it would be a reference back to Matthew chapter 26, verse 33. Peter answered him, "Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." That's not in John, but John records something vaguely similar, and Matthew is out and well known by the time John writes. If it's the second, it would be a way of dealing with forsaking discipleship and going back to his former mode of life as a fisherman. But, as we said back at the beginning of this chapter, that's not a completely fair assessment. He's thinking in that direction, but so are the other 6 present. If this is what Jesus means, then if anything, he's singling Peter out as the ringleader, which would be fair. But ultimately, another detail we're about to discuss tips the scales toward these, meaning the other disciples. Do you love me more than these love me? That was his implicit proclamation, even in the face of Jesus' prediction that he would deny him 3 times. Now, here we find Jesus asking Peter 3 times in succession, "Do you love me?" Each time, Peter affirms that he does indeed love Jesus. And Jesus has a response each time. 1, feed my lambs. 2, tend my sheep. 3, feed my sheep. These are all versions of the same thought. Do the work I assigned to you. This is a hint about his allowing himself to be distracted with earthly things, as well as a reminder to live up to his profession of faith. It's as if Jesus is giving him the chance to reverse his 3 denials and instead confess Jesus 3 times. This is a reconciliation. It's a lot more for Peter than it is for Jesus. There's one more point that is important here. Well, okay, there are several more important points here, but one more that we should address before we move on. In English, we read the word love 7 times in this passage. 4 of them are from Jesus, one of which is a duplicate, and 3 are from Peter. Okay, there's maybe some symbolism there with the 7, but that's not really the point. That misses out on something that is more significant. There are 2 different Greek words used here for love. Those verbs are agapao and phileo. Jesus asks twice, "Do you have agape for me?" Peter answers twice, "I have philia for you." Finally, Jesus says, "Do you have philia for me?" And Peter responds, "I have philia for you." Much has been made and overmade about this and the distinction between these 2 types of love. Most of that is complete and utter nonsense. The words are used very nearly interchangeably in both the New Testament and the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament. Over the centuries, it has often been concluded that agape is a divine and holy love and that philia is a human, common love. And then the passage is read in that light. This doesn't really work. For starters, agape is used to describe creepy, rapey love, which is to say sexual lust, in Genesis 34:3, which in English says, "And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her." This is just after the point where he raped her. So that divine and holy love thing isn't looking so good. Nevertheless, both in general and with John, there is a slight preference for expressing God's love or godly love as agape rather than philia. So we shouldn't completely go to the other extreme and say that these are the same exact word and it's only changed up for the sake of stylistic variance. There's some slight suggestion that Peter isn't quite willing to go to the extent Jesus is asking, but it's nothing huge. John treats it as if the 3rd time Jesus asks is more or less equivalent to the 2nd time he asked. Now, all of that was terribly interesting, I'm sure, but the point is that an undue focus and confusion about the wording of the passage would lead us to the wrong conclusion about verse 17. He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." It's not that he's grieved because Jesus has changed the wording and is now asking a different question, because aside from an ever so slight suggestion of a distinction, neither Peter nor Jesus nor John is making a big deal out of the different words. So why is he grieved? He's not grieved over philia. He's grieved over the 3rd time. He's remembering his 3-fold denial. He feels terrible. He's making a 3-fold confession, and he feels as if Jesus is deliberately drawing attention to his failure not so long ago. And he feels as if he absolutely deserves that unwanted attention to his fault. Why did he cave in and deny him before? It was to avoid unwanted attention, to avoid being singled out and targeted for similar treatment. The brash, impetuous one who's always saying what the others are thinking but are too afraid to say, often ill-advisedly, went silent when he should have spoken up. Now he's trying to reverse that, and Jesus has a prediction about it. Verse 18 is a little vague, but John tells us pretty clearly what it means. Remember, by the time John wrote, Peter had been dead for quite a while, crucified by Rome. And Jesus said, "When you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." He avoided that kind of treatment once by denying Christ. Christ is telling Peter, that's not going to happen again. This is mind-bending and very calculated and beautiful. Okay, much as I'd love to spend another half hour on this section, we've got to move on. Verse 20. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who also had leaned back against him during the supper and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me." So the saying spread abroad among the brothers that this disciple was not to die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" Well, we have a clear identification of John if we hadn't already put together who it was. This is combined then with a silly legend that apparently had popped up. I guess the idea is that, well, John's so old, apparently he's just going to stick around until Jesus returns. Yeah, not so much. There's an important admonition here. It's not that we're not allowed to look at each other and express concern for each other's relationships with God. That's what Peter is doing. But Jesus is reminding Peter that he needs to focus on himself first and foremost. His answer to Peter's question is, "What's it to you?" Now, I don't think that Peter is trying to put John down here, and I don't think John is trying to put Peter down by relating this. If anything, it's the opposite. They have great respect for each other. Remember, John stuck close to Jesus throughout the whole ordeal of his arrest and trial and crucifixion. Peter is feeling inadequate in comparison. Jesus' point isn't leave him alone and worry about yourself, so much as that has nothing to do with you. Based on Jesus' response about when John would die, Peter understood that Jesus was predicting his violent death a few moments ago. And this is a hint that Peter was thinking of his violent death as sort of a punishment for his failure. And so he's wondering what's in store for John, who didn't fail in the same way. Jesus' response is to say, what does it matter? Would it change anything? Leave that to him and me. Verses 24 and 25. This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. Now there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Okay, what is the point of this? The author is identifying himself, and he's going through this little statement about the fact that the world could not contain the books. He's signing off. And he's also pointing out in the few verses that precede that he's not only signing off in this gospel that he's writing, but that eventually he knows he's going to sign off permanently. Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? He's tipping his hand in the clearest way here in identifying himself and ending the book in, well, I think the most satisfying and meaningful way that he can. And that's John. We'll have one more installment in this series that will be a retrospective. We will look at important themes throughout the book and sketch out the development of the narrative and then close the book on John and move on to other things. I look forward to that, but for now, what have you gotten out of this book? If you've been with me the whole time, then I hope this caps off the book for you and helps you to see how important everything within it is and leaves you with a conviction to trust Jesus, obey him, and confess him before others, following his example even in suffering, if necessary. If not, then I hope you'll go to our YouTube channel and find the playlist, John's Gospel series, and go through the whole thing. But more than that, I hope you'll just sit down and read the book for yourself. It's important and it's powerful. What should we get out of it overall? John didn't really tell us that as clearly this time, but we can see it back in chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples which are not written in this book, but these are written, so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. This isn't just about appreciating the story, or learning history, or philosophy, or comparative world religion. It's about all the marbles. If you would like to learn more about what Jesus expects of us in this life, as well as more about what he has in store for us in the next, then get in touch with us at River Ridge and we'd love to help. You can reach us at 812-550-6234 or info@riverridgechurch.org, or visit us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh, Indiana for our 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Sunday worship, as well as our 7 p.m. Wednesday Bible study. Thanks for joining me today on Iron Sharpens Iron.